For today's lesson, you are going to be learning how to create cheese and chive bread, and you will then be creating this at home or in class, depending on what instructions your teacher gives you. So first of all, you are going to need 250 grams of self-raising flour, a pinch of salt and pepper. You can just simply add this to your flour before you bring it into school. You don't need to bring like separate containers of salt and pepper. You'll need 40 grams of butter, 125 grams of cheddar cheese, a small bunch of chives, 1 medium egg, and 150 millilitres of milk. So please write down these ingredients on your recipe sheet, and then I will let you know how to create this recipe.
Sieve your flour into your bowl using a sieve. Tip your flour into the sieve like that, and then you just need to shake the sieve very gently, and that gets rid of all the larger pieces of flour, and it becomes a lot easier for you to rub it in later on. After you have sieved your flour into your bowl, you might want to add a pinch of salt and a pinch of pepper. Just a pinch, you don't need too much, and then mix that bit in. We are then going to add in our 40 grams of butter, and with regards to that you are going to use a method called the rubbing in method, and effectively you're getting the fat that you've got here and you're rubbing it in and blending it in with the flour. If you've got lots of butter, you might want to cut it into sections, or you can just break it with your hands. So usually we keep the butter out of the fridge so it's a little bit softer and easier to then rub into our flour. When you've finished rubbing in your fat or your butter or your margarine or whatever it is you've got for that, you should not be able to see any lumps within this. If there are any sort of big lumps of butter or fat, then you need to keep going with this rubbing in method until they've all disappeared. To get rid of all this flour off your hands, simply brush your hands like this. Don't just go straight to the tap and wash them off, or else it will end up binding that flour to your hands. It's a lot more difficult to get off then. Okay, to this mixture I'm then going to add my grated cheese. You need to grate this at home, not at school, so bring it into school ready grated. And I'm also going to add my chives. Now my chives I will need to cut, so let me just grab these and show you what I mean by that. So here are my chives. You usually buy them roughly like this, and what you need to do is you need to get a pair of scissors, and you're going to snip them into very small fine pieces for your cheese and chive bread. Obviously when you get close to the end, move your fingers along. Then from here you need to get your wooden spoon and mix this all together so that your chives and your cheese and your flour and margarine are all combined together in the bowl. When you've done that, put that to one side and collect a jug. Now this jug, you will need to get your egg in the jug. If there's not enough jugs, you can always use one of the glass bowls as well. Now what you need to do is you need to crack this egg. So hit it on the side of the jug and then separate it like so. The shell then needs to go straight in the bin. With either a fork or a whisk, you need to beat your egg in the jug until it's all mixed together. And then you're adding about half of your egg to this mixture. Remember, only half, not all of it. So literally just tipping it up like this and added about half of that mixture in. After you've added half of your egg, you then need to get your milk. Now measure your milk out at home and just bring it in sort of a bottle that doesn't spill, and add roughly half of this milk. And then what you're going to do with the wooden spoon, not your hands, is you're going to mix all of this together. Now make sure as much of the flour has got into the liquid part of this as possible. You might be able to see that I'm turning my bowl around, and this just helps make sure that I haven't missed any part of the mixture. If you've got bits like here that's stuck, you can just use either your hand or a bit of cutlery to just brush those bits off to ensure that as much of this is going to start combining as possible. If it's then not combining, then you need to add a little bit more milk to ensure that it gets to a point where it's almost a ball. I'm sprinkling it around in a sort of circle motion so that it gets as much of the bowl covered as possible. And we don't want this to be too sticky, or else it's going to become impossible for us to work with it and make it into bread. So if it's too sticky, then you need to add a little bit more flour gradually. We're adding the milk gradually, so we hopefully don't get ourselves to that stage. So don't add it all in at once, just add it gradually. When it's looking a little bit more like this, you can then start to use your hands to sort of start trying to form a ball. I think this one's going to need a little bit more milk to enable it to do that, but I'm going to start trying to make a ball first, and then add a bit more milk to the bits that are obviously not sticking. So you should find that when your cheese and chive bread has gone into a bit of a ball, that it's pretty much cleared out the bowl and there shouldn't be very much of the mixture left in there. Then you want to knead this bread a little bit. So using this part of your hand here, push down on it whilst it's in the bowl to knead it. Now it shouldn't be sticking to your fingers here, or if it does, only a very small amount. If it's really sticky, you're going to need to put a bit more flour into the bowl when you're kneading it. Once you've done that for a little while, you are then going to need to put this bowl to one side, and you're going to need a flat and even work surface. Now with this work surface, either use one of the school flour dredgers or just sprinkle a little bit of flour onto the work surface so we don't end up getting our bread stuck to it. You can then do a little bit more kneading on this surface, and you are kneading it until it is smooth. Then you want to form it into a circle. Squish it down a little bit. It can go a little bit wider. Remember, we've used self-raising flour, so this will rise as well. So it should be about 18 centimetres roughly, but it can be a little bigger if needed. Just pat it down like this. You're then going to divide this, so you're going to use a knife to cut these into sections. About 6 to 8 sections will be fine. When you've done this, get yourself a baking tray with some greaseproof paper over the top and pick up each of the segments and place them evenly spaced apart on this tray. If you put them right next to each other, when the self-raising flour rises, what's going to happen is they're going to end up joining up and merging together. So try and keep them as separate as possible. Roughly like that. If you have any remaining egg yolk, you can just on here put some on top to give it a nice brown colour. If you've got any of that remaining, you can do that with a pastry brush. So this then needs to go into the oven, and it needs to go in the oven at 200 degrees for 15 minutes. And these should have risen well, and they should be a golden sort of colour. Whilst that is cooking, you then need to make sure everything is tidy in your kitchen, and wash all the equipment up that you've used. When you've got flour on a work surface like this, don't just use a wet cloth on it, because it will bind it together. Get your hand like this and brush as much of the excess into your hand as possible, and then use a cloth just on the remaining few little bits.